Welcome to the Jets UK podcast. I'm one of your hosts, James Groves, and today I'm joined by a friend of the podcast, a guy who is part of the Oklahoma Draw podcast with our other friend that we've had on, Andrew Golden. We have the other half of the podcast, and that is Matt. You may know him as ZazzyJets on Twitter. So Matt, thanks for jumping on this week.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Yeah, no, it's like it's kind of we were speaking with David and with Andrew. We're trying to get something where all four of us can get on at the very least in terms of that kind of true crossover podcast. But that will do for now. Like I said, guys, if you haven't listened to the Oklahoma Draw podcast with Andrew that we know we've had a few times, and with Matt, it's a really good listen. They have really good discussions about the topics of the week or the last couple of weeks. So it's really good listen. So I highly recommend that. Matt, let's jump into your kind of background with the team. How did you become a Jets fan, and when was that really?
Let's see. I feel like it all starts with my competitive nature with my father, probably. He was a Yankees, Giants, Rangers, uh, a Knicks fan, and I went the complete opposite direction from birth. So Jets, Nets, Mets, Nets, Devils, all the Ets, and it kind of blossomed from there. Uh, it was mostly just casual until one play changed everything. That where I crossed the threshold from being just a casual young fan to being a diehard Jets fan, and that was a play by Corbett. It wasn't even a good play. It was a net negative play actually, but I remember Corbett trying to jump over two defenders. I think they're Bear defenders, uh, and just showed so much heart and athleticism, just trying to make this one play, jumping over these incredibly athletic linebackers, and he ultimately fumbled the ball. But that one instance got me so excited that I've been trying to feed that excitement ever since with Jets football, and it's been downhill from there. I've just continued to just feed off this team.
Yeah, you have these moments, don't you, with this team? That, there's especially that era of football was there was a lot of great characters in that team. Um, yeah, and Corbett was a major part of my reason, as the listeners will know. Monday Night Miracle. The game. I saw the highlights of the game the summer after the actual game happened, and he was a massive part of that performance to beat the Dolphins that night, and that was the kind of game that locked in the Jets for me as a fan over here. So yeah, Corbett is very much part of that experience for me as well. Um, this year, go into this year. How are you feeling about things coming off that first year with all the rookie head coach, rookie offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and quarterback, of course. How are you feeling about things going into year two for this regime?
I feel like my head is where most people's heads are at right now. Uh, I would say I'm a little bit more cautious than others, but still optimistic for sure. This team is definitely heading in the right direction. It's been so long since we've had people in the front office that really understood what our problem areas were and then actually took the steps to fix it. Whether those steps taken to fix our issues actually pan out, that's a different question. But the fact that they're even doing that is such a change. It's such a deviation from what we're used to that in itself is encouraging. Um, and I don't feel like a lot of Jets fans are used to that. And that alone has people's optimism through the roof. Now, where my caution comes in is, well, they're still the Jets. And until proven otherwise, they will always be the Jets that we know from the last decade or so of mediocrity. We need a deviation actual play to really change my mind overall. But even still, very optimistic. Uh, Everything that they've done in the last two off seasons has shown that their head is where it needs to be, um, and now it just needs to all be put together on the field.
Yeah, and no more than from number two, right? I mean, on your podcast, you
Hmm.
guys kind of listed, especially offensively, guys looked at all the different groupings and the talent that was there, and you kind of worked out kind of the weak point seems to be with Zach potentially, right? Like
Yes.
he's the biggest question mark, let's say, in terms of where you think that the talent goes and performs. He's the biggest kind of like swing factor. And so, I guess, some people will go, oh, you're being too negative. But I think it's realistic because, we haven't seen it. I think that we did see some positive improvements coming to the end of last year. When he came back from his injury specifically, he looked better. He seemed to be, reading the field better, making better decisions, better throws because of that
Hmm.
mind process probably clearing up. But you still have to see it happen, and until it happens, we have to say that is probably the biggest swing factor, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, when he came back from his injury, I feel like he sort of took on more of a game manager role. He was taking what the defenses were giving him. He was taking less dynamic shots down the field, and the sum of all of that was less turnovers and more efficient drives. Uh, but in the end, that's not what we want from Zach. I think we could have kept Darnold and built this team around him to be a game manager, if that's what we wanted. And maybe we would win 6 or 7 games a year, and that would be that. That's not what we want. We wanted Zach based off of his potential, based off of what he brings to the league in terms of being a dynamic thrower downfield, in terms of being a runner with the ball. He brings so much to the table that sort of puts him above a game manager role. So, yes, he showed that he can be a game manager, and that's an important step. It really is. Because once you're able to at least get that down, the basics, then everything else should come next. So the fact that we've already reached that milestone is important. But at the same time, we still need to see him take that next step, and we have not.
Yeah, it's all a waiting game at this point, isn't it? With the young kid, I think that like I said, I think he's making the right steps, but it still has to be seen to play out, doesn't it? So yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where this team is looking, pretty good. I think defensively, what are your thoughts on, on that side of the ball? Well, I think offensively they've really put together some good weapons, but defensively they were even worse than the offensive unit last year. So how you feel about things on the defensive side of the ball?
I'm a little lukewarm, actually. Uh, so I'm happy with where we are edge-wise, which is probably the most important position, because if we're not getting pressure, then the rest of the defense will suffer. Uh, but at the same time, we've done maybe the bare minimum to improve our run defense. And that is where I think our pain point will be, our biggest pain point will be, is against the run still. We didn't really do much to improve in the interior of our defensive line, to really beef up to stop the run there. And we didn't really add much to the linebackers either. Where we did really make improvements was the secondary, bringing in Sauce and Whitehead. And they are most definitely assets against the run. But if we're relying on our secondary to be our big run stoppers, that's a problem because by the time the running backs are getting to the secondary, they're already getting giant chunk plays. So this defense is built to defend with a lead. They want to force teams to pass the ball because that forces them into our strength, our pass rush, and our secondary's ability to cover. So that is still a major concern for me. Uh, Whether it's the interior of our defensive line, with really only one starter quality defender, in my opinion,
Hmm.
which is Quinnen. Um, Franklin Myers, I think will do a great job on in the interior on pass downs. But I don't see him starting there. I think he starts more outside. So I really don't see much else there.
Mhm.
You have Rankins, who's getting up there in age and really hasn't been producing uh, to starter level. And then you have a bunch of unproven guys behind them that really aren't starter quality either. Shepard, Solomon Thomas, Marshall from last year, who showed decent flashes, but at the same time still hasn't proven that he's worthy of a starting role.
Yeah.
So other than Q, who is there? And that worries me a lot. And same goes for the linebacker. You've got the other Williams, Quincy, and then CJ, and then nothing behind them.
Yeah.
Together, yeah, they're very good. I like them going forward together, especially if our base set becomes a nickel, pretty much. So, but then what happens if somebody gets hurt? It's
Mm.
so thin. We have nobody really there
Yeah.
to step in,
We're going to
and
go
that
through all
scares
that
me.
later on. Like I said on this podcast, we are going to go through the kind of linebacker. I forgot to drop at the beginning of the podcast. We're going to go through the linebacker roster battles with Matt as well, and so we'll look at that depth in the linebacker unit. But it's interesting you say that because we started off on the defensive side. We've gone from the weakest group on the team overall to the strongest. That's where we're going with these roster battles. We started off with safety last week. David kind of suggested that maybe linebacker could have been it. I was thinking about Mosley being enough to elevate it above the safety group, but neither here nor there. But then also the defensive line, in terms of the interior defensive line, is probably the next group we'll be looking at, which still indicates that there's a lack of talent compared to what we have on offensively. I think it's looking a little bit more stronger, which is actually obviously a very strange thing for us Jets fans, isn't it? To have that kind of the offensive side being the more say positive side that in terms of where we can actually be scoring a lot of points and maybe letting up quite a few points, which should be an interesting thing for us Jets fans, right?
It really should be. But I think that was kind of Salah's plan. I feel like he knows defense very well.
Hmm.
He trusts his defensive coaches a lot. So he wanted to really shore up the other side of the field first. Make sure that they're settled because really once the offense is settled, it makes his job a lot easier on defense. If we're scoring points, then it really kind of narrows down what other teams are able to do or even can do. It forces them to do things that really benefit us more.
Yeah.
So it allows us to really drive the direction of the game. Uh, but right now it's still a question mark on defense because what if the offense isn't what we think it will be?
Hmm.
Then what's our defense?
Yeah. It's going to be problematic, isn't it? So yeah, it's going to be one of those things where we are putting a lot of the eggs in the offensive basket, and I think that's the right idea to do is to surround Zach because at the end of the day he's going to be if he makes it and he makes that leap and to becoming a top 10, top 12 QB for his career, let's say, that's going to change the outlook of our team building for a long, long time. So you want to basically try to support that and the defense. While you try to improve that, you can allow for a little bit less quality maybe, and you try to use the coaches that you have to kind of elevate that quality and get it, get them overachieving to kind of play before you can kind of infuse some talent down the road or some extra talent down the road. But yeah, it's an interesting place where we are with the team where if you just sit back a little bit and take the goggles off, the Jets green goggles off, you can see some holes there, you can see some potential struggles, but yeah, I think everything's from coaching, from team building is really positive, but we still need to see these players kind of take that step. A lot of them take that step because they're quite a young team. So yeah, I think we'll wrap up the chat on the team for now. We'll head over to a little bit of news. Okay, so for the news this week, there's not again. It's the off season. It's not going to be a lot of news, but we had a little bit of news, jet related news this week, and that was the Ring of Honor announcement for this week, this year. Sorry, we have Nick Mangold, DeBrickashaw Ferguson, and Darrell Revis are heading to the Ring of Honor. So Mangold will be presented at the Bengals game, Brick will be presented at the Pats game, and Revis will be presented at the Bears home game. So, yeah, pretty impressive players. And Matt, these are players
Very.
of our, they're very much part of our kind of history with the team, and kind of great players that we had in our earlier years, right?
Oh, absolutely. In the beginning, I was talking about like Corbett, who really got me into becoming a diehard Jets fan. But then the next generation of Jets fans, they were born in the age of Revis, in the age of Mangold, in the age of DeBrickashaw. These are the studs that really fed the fan base for a good chunk of time. Um, so yeah, to see these guys finally get honored in the Ring of Honor, will be a pleasure. I want to see if I can make it out to at least one of these games to see it. Maybe the Revis game. I'm glad they didn't put the Revis game against the Patriots.
Yeah, I think they purposely did that. That they kind of kept Rivas away from the Pats. That yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, it's interesting to see how they paired up each one. I was thinking, oh look, they look like they're doing these games against bigger, really good opponents. So it kind of gives the crowd a lift. Inspires the team and the crowd to help support the team when they come out at the second half. But then I look, oh, but they are doing the Bears with Revis, so that logic
Yeah.
doesn't hold as much. So, but no, yeah, a great for me as well. These guys were incredible with Brick and Mango coming in the first round together. Revis the next year after that as the first round pick. Just the amount, how good they were in that kind of in those Rex Ryan years, those championship years of 2009, 2010. They were, the best, some of the best in their position easily, and in really, with especially with Brick and Revis, really important
Hmm.
positions as well. And you talk about Brick's, his Iron Man title credentials are very
Reliability
strong,
off the
right? I mean, he
charts.
came out only for a trick play that Rex wanted to run, and Revis that season that we see the graphic of all the time, the 2009 year, but just overall, just was incredible how you just trusted him just to erase anybody who was there. Anybody, it doesn't matter who's coming to town. That he's going to take out your best player, and then it allowed Rex Ryan to, especially Rex Ryan when he had his hands on him, to really go crazy with the rest of the guys, knowing that Revis could lock down even people like Calvin Johnson, Andre Johnson, Terrell Owens, whoever. He could look down, and then Mangold. I mean, what a consistent factor for the QBs coming through, especially for Mark Sanchez in that kind of era. To have that guy who was just so helped them so much. What a help for a lot of these young QBs. And unfortunately, these guys didn't really have the team success. But the Ring of Honor is a great honor from the team to them, and they highly deserve it. So yeah, really good to see that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Any other thoughts on the Ring of Honor before we head off to the next topic?
Yeah, I mean their careers speak for themselves. The fabulous players on and off the field. Uh, and I feel like the off the field stuff probably doesn't get looked at enough. About all three of these guys really show up when it comes to supporting communities and people just out in the world. So yeah, I love that these guys are getting the attention needed when it comes to Ring of Honor. Uh, I when you look at like jerseys at games, it used to be more our generation with Cotchery, Curtis Martin, Corbett, but then now it's Revis, it's Mangold, it's and it's the Brickashaw. Their jerseys pretty much own the stands. But now it's time for a new generation. So
Yeah.
I think it's the perfect time to really uh, sunset their era.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great example of saying that, because it is great to kind of turn attention to this young generation because we've had such a lack of talent to really say, yeah, this guy is a true Jets great. that you could say, even this era, which player have we had that would go into the Ring of Honor? I just don't really have anyone in mind who.
No.
I mean, maybe I'm forgetting someone. Maybe the listeners are saying, "Hey, what about this one player?" But it's not coming to mind. So
Nope.
that tells you all you need to know, right? And yeah, so since Brick and Revis and Mangold retired at almost around the same time, they kind of really did retire within a kind of year or two of each other. I think we've kind of just lacked that kind of quality and those kind of that kind of really high level, that name at least. They weren't the players they were early in their career, but they're kind of the players that were part of the team that were part of that kind of era. So it is right. You are right. It is time for the new generation to establish themselves on a path to becoming, get themselves on that wall in the facility, and then name, run out at half time during a game, 15, 20 years down the line. It's time for them to start that journey, and it's been too long, to be honest.
It's
So
been too long.
it has been. We the next bit of news is basically just a little bit of kind of a discussion on something that Jeff Ulbrich said at his press conference, and it kind of goes a little bit aligned to what you were talking about earlier with the positional groups and the defensive line that we talked about. He was talking about the defensive line snap count and keeping everyone to kind of between 30 to 35 snaps, and that includes everybody. And that was a pretty strong rule he says we're going to stay to because he wants to keep people refreshed. What's your feelings on this generally?
Um, well, generally, I think it's an ideal. I think ideally, he hopes that the depth and the talent along the defensive line is that where you can take a Lawson or a Quinnen Williams off the field, and the talent behind them is at a level where there isn't that much of a drop off in production. It's an ideal. I don't think it's
That's where
reality.
that's where it stops.
I,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's expecting Johnson or Michael Clemens to really step in right away as rookies and be at the same level as Carl Lawson. I don't think it's realistic. It's not going to happen. So it, it really falls more to what it was last year mostly, and even last year they rotated a lot, even without the depth behind, which I didn't really like that much. When they took Franklin Myers off the field, when they took Huff off the field, when they took Quinnen off the field, our defense showed that they were really not up to the task when these guys were off the field. Uh, but at the same time, they weren't only playing 30 to 35 snaps. I think they're playing close to 40 snaps. So even then, if if this rule applied last year, it didn't actually take form. So I can see them wanting to do it more this year with more talent at the edge. But at the same time, I like we were saying before with the interior defensive line and the depth behind Quinnen. I still don't think we have that depth behind Quinnen to
Mm.
really take him out for half a game. So ideal, yes. Reality, no.
Yeah, I think it comes down to it's interesting because there definitely was them trying to push that ideal through last year when they kind of replaced good players with less than good players effectively, and you saw the drop off in results in play. They need to kind of find a balance there. I think that there's the right mindset to kind of try and make sure that you're not overworking players and making sure you keep people refreshed. But at certain times you just got to say keep someone in on a series, or even during a very tight game in the second half, you got to kind of throw that away and say, okay, you're going to have a higher workload queue. We need you to kind of really take over the game and kind of put it to bed for us. And you can't say, okay, well, we're going to take you out and put Nathan Shepard on. It's just a massive drop off. So, yeah, I think it's the deal that you have as a really good team with a lot of depth, and we're not quite there yet. So they've got to pivot a little bit, just like they did last year with the tight ends. Eventually, they realised the tight ends aren't going to work, and they made a few changes to try to not be so strong on 12 personnel. because they didn't have the ability. I think they need to do that with this year with the defensive line as well. Make sure that you're kind of getting the best players out there at the most pivotal moments. So that's for sure. I mean, yeah, you touched on the defensive line. I mean, we're going to probably do it next week in terms of our kind of breaking down the positional group. But you look at that defensive line, the person there isn't really that anchor. That person, that Foley Fatukasi that we're missing. Is it someone that you're looking that we should try to? Is that somewhere that you feel that we need to have is someone who's more of a kind of run first, run stuffer first kind of defensive lineman that's going to go next to Q? Is that what your worries at in terms of the run defense?
Well, yes, mostly. But I'd also just like another guy that can start, right? Because if let's say Q gets hurt, who's starting in our interior right now? Is it Rankins and Solomon Thomas? I don't know. It's I really just don't know who they would even fill in as starter. So I want somebody that at least has starter quality. I'm thinking Larry Ogunjobi, who's on the Bengals. Um, Maybe even Ndamukong Suh. I feel like that's a
Yeah,
name that people kind of shy away of because of his past. Uh, but I think since going to the Buccaneers, he's really had time to reflect on himself and his career and what he's done, and really saw how much of a distraction he was, and he really toned everything down uh, in terms of his ego. I feel like his ego kind of took a back seat to his play, and he's still a very serviceable starter against the run and as a pass rusher.
yeah.
I think he's somebody I would really want to look at.
Yeah, there's a few names out there. I think the Jets have been in discussion with Ogunjobi. There's been that report that come out recently that they've actually made offers of the kind of the take it or leave it offers that the Jets have been said to do with Joe Douglas. So I don't know if that's for him. That's for Quan Alexander and Lara Ogunjobi. So we will see how that plays out. I think they'll probably add another body. They're probably waiting to see, this is the offer they want to spend. They'll probably just see if there's any cuts. Get a Morgan Moses type release at a
Hmm.
position that they need. Maybe that's the case. So, there's still plenty of time to do that. And I think, what you see from Joe Douglas is that, he everything seems to make sense, right? And if we're seeing something that doesn't seem right, it seems to be he also sees that, which has not always been the case
No.
with the Jets brass. But when we see something that's like, okay, if we can see this as fans, how the hell are the team not seeing this? But Joe Douglas, I think they get. I mean, he gets it. He gets it, and you can't always get every position solved when you're kind of building. But I think there's a want to, and I think he's aware of the need to get another body in that defensive line rotation. So for sure. So yeah, I mean that's kind of wrap up the kind of general news. Again, it's all very off-seasony kind of stuff. But that's kind of the discussion points that we're having this week. And yeah, we'll wrap it up for now, and we'll head over to our linebacker roster battle. Okay, so for the roster battle this week, we'll be covering the linebackers. So pretty much, we're going through the starters, the backups, a few discussion points on the players that we have in the team, and then maybe look at some other players who are not currently on the team that could be part of the team. So Matt, so our starters are pretty much locked in. The two of them you would think are CJ Mosley and Quincy Williams, right? That's pretty much where you start the discussion,
Hmm.
right?
Yep. Yeah. You got those two mainstays. It sounds like they're very confident in Quincy Williams being a full time starter, or not only a full time starter, but maybe even a star uh, in this defense. And he definitely showed flashes last year. You see him flying around the field like a missile. All he really needs to do is focus that energy a little bit more, be a little less wild with it, control it, and he can. He has that potential to be that star in the middle. And then you have CJ, who's just the ever reliable CJ Mosley. He's the leader of this defense. The defense kind of builds up from his energy. So he's him and Quincy together. They're a good duo. But yeah, like you said, with once you get past those two names, not much there.
No, it isn't. And what's interesting about Quincy, I mean, we all know about CJ. There's nothing much has to be said about CJ Mose at this point. He's come back from, last year he came back for his first full season, and I think he did a pretty good job in his first full season. I think slowed down a little bit at the end of the season, but I think hopefully a second year back into shape, back into kind of conditioning, hopefully, and a little bit more talent around him, people playing
Hmm.
better, it should help him to keep his game at a really high level throughout the season. About Quincy's interesting is that he was interviewed by the Jets. It was about a 5 minute interview. I heard of him last week or 2 weeks ago, and he basically mentioned that the one thing he wants to change is he wants to basically not always go for the big hit. He actually said, he goes, that's the one thing I'm looking. He goes, what would you change? He goes, not always look for the big hit. And I think they're driving on that kind of being more aware, being more than just, as I've called him, a homing missile right now.
Yep.
He's like, go get him. And he just goes right for that play. You got to be more than that player. I think there's multiple chances where he missed potential opportunities that would
Yes.
be even more than just a tackle for loss or anything like that he was going for initially. You could have had interceptions. You could have had bigger plays had he kind of had his head a bit more kind of aware of what was going on. If he can do that, he's got all the ability. He's got great, a physical ability at the position. If he can just have that little bit more cerebral nature, like have that a little bit more of what CJ Mosley has, he could be a really, really good player. But we still have to see. Like many players on our team, we still have a question mark. So
Wait
even
and
on,
see.
like I said, CJ is a solid player, but even the guy next to him, who's pretty much locked in, is still a question mark to an extent as well, which is it shows the kind of lack of quality in the unit. And like I said last week, David thought this is the weakest unit of the team. And when you go through it and you look at it, I mean, yeah, you can debate on this or safety, but this is definitely weakness. Behind those two, you think, okay, if they play a three linebacker set, who's the third guy? Is it going to be Sherwood with him coming back like he played last year? Is it going to be Marcel Harris, the guy that we brought in from San Francisco? Could it be Hamza, who's probably got a higher upside than both of them, or at least for Sherwood, he's got a higher upside to play, but he struggled last year. Delshon Phillips played quite a lot, and he's there. And then we've got DQ Thomas, who's the undrafted rookie. So that's it. That's the linebacking group. That is it, and that shows you kind of that there's no obvious name to be three of them, and you're probably looking at it and going, well, that's probably because they're only going to play two, right? It probably indicates that a lot of the sets they're going to play are going to be two linebacker sets with kind of an extra cornerback, an extra safety. That's generally what you're thinking when you look at this depth chart, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's exactly what they're going to do. Our base set's pretty much going to be the nickel,
Yeah.
with Whitehead probably having a big role in the middle of the defense, and probably doing a lot of a single high safety with whoever our free safety is, whether it's Joyner or Pinnock. So, but in the middle, at linebacker, it's right now it's Quincy, CJ, and then not much else. When Sherwood and Nasruddin came out, they're kind of the good side and the bad side of Quincy. You got Nasruddin, who is kind of also a heat-seeking missile, who's very physical, very active on the field. And then you had Sherwood, who's also more cerebral, more of a CJ Mosley type, uh, who maybe didn't take as many risks, uh, but also had a very good understanding of what his role is and everything else going on around him. Unfortunately for Sherwood, we're probably not going to see him until maybe October or November. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what his timeline is right now.
Because he had
Uh,
was it Achilles? Was it for him as well last year?
yes.
Yeah, because we had the three. We had Carl, we had him, we had Marcus May all had Achilles injuries, didn't they? So it was kind of a quick kind of rash of that injury. So yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
unfortunately.
yeah, I mean he won't be maybe fully ready to go. He'll be there and thereabouts, but probably not quite there for the opening game where you're probably looking at some other players potentially. And to be honest, there isn't much more we can say about these players. Like I said, Marcel Harris is an interesting name because he's a guy that they targeted in free agency. They brought in a guy who's a guy who knows obviously Salah from San Francisco. So there is something there that maybe he is the guy who could start when they do play three on certain sets, he's the guy who comes in before Sherwood maybe is the guy that he look long term or kind of into the season. But there's not much more to talk about this unit in terms of the players on it. It's more interesting to see what's on the free agent market at this in this part of the conversation because obviously very well known. They're interested in Quan Alexander, another guy who's got a lot of background with Salah from San Francisco, but he's been everywhere. So I mean, first of all, we'll jump off with him, and then we'll jump into a few other guys who could be targets if he goes elsewhere. So, what's your thoughts on potentially getting Quan Alexander to kind of be that extra guy in there?
Quan brings a lot of athleticism with him. Ran a 4.55, 6'1", 227. He's got a lot of potential to and knowledge that comes with him to really be another vet presence. Uh, because we need that. There's so much inexperience behind our two starters that having the ability to get a guy like Quan would definitely bring a lot of added benefits, especially when it comes to teaching up the younger guys as well, like Nasruddin and Sherwood. I think Quan would be a great teacher alongside CJ to really teach these guys up. Even that he's only 27. I think he'll be like 28 by maybe the start of the season, but he brings so much knowledge to the position and knowledge of the defense that Saul and Ulrich are trying to instill here. Uh, at the same time, he hasn't really been productive. So I think he brings probably more to the table as a teacher than as an actually productive linebacker,
Mm.
maybe. And here's another thing: would he want to come here as a backup if we're doing more two linebacker sets? He probably won't see the field that much. Is he okay with that?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, I think that like any good coaching staff, they'll probably would cater the sets they have to the players they have. I think currently, if they only have real confidence in the two guys that we've listed as the two starters, it probably indicates that they'll go with more with that to kind of to play to the strengths of other parts of the positional groups on the defense. Possibly you get a Quan Alexander, it gives you a little bit more freedom and ability to be happy to play three linebacker sets. So that might change depending on him being part of the team or not. But he's definitely a name to look out for. He's only 27 years old. Obviously, has experience with a multitude of different schemes. Obviously, but knows the San Francisco one and Salah's defense very well as well. So yeah, interesting guy. I mean, they've put out, like we said earlier, they've put out an offer for him apparently. Rumor is, and that it's kind of take it or leave it. So if he does leave it and he goes elsewhere, and we see him sign for another team, who's another name out there in the market currently? Who was, and I say this because by the time I release this, maybe one of those guys goes off the market as kind of the podcast, normal podcast procedure. But who's another guy currently on the market who would interest in you?
My probably top choice would be KJ Wright, uh, formerly of the Las Vegas Raiders, but was a mainstay in Seattle for a very long time. He's definitely on the older side, but he also brings so much more, a lot of knowledge of the defense that Ulrich and Sala really want to instill. And I feel like he's been a more productive linebacker than Quan. Even at this age, I feel like he brings more to the table. Now I feel like he's probably holding out for more of a starter role. But like you said, maybe if we get a guy of his quality, then we run more three linebacker sets.
Yeah.
So it's a give and a take there. And I love what he brings, the knowledge, everything that goes with him.
Yeah, I think you're right. He is definitely a guy who, if they brought him in, you can see them say, okay, well, we can expand the amount of times we use three, where you would have him and CJ and Quincy on there as a three. With Quincy really being the guy who can just go flying elsewhere, and those two guys just reading the game so well. I mean, he spoke really glowingly of his time with DJ Reed. And he said, he thought he's going to have a really good season this year for the Jets. He was on, I think it was NFL Network, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, so he's aware of what's happening here. There's some positive thoughts towards what the Jets are doing from him personally. So if they did approach him, then maybe that's not where if he's got those thoughts, then maybe it is somewhere that he goes, okay, yeah. I think they're going. He's 5 years older than Quan, which is probably why they're focusing on someone like Quan Alexander as a potential guy who could be here for a couple of years, rather than KJ Wright, who you would think would be here for just a year at a time. Um, I think a few other names to talk about are probably, I think, Alexander Johnson, from formerly of the Denver Broncos. I think he's always flashed pretty well when he's played as well, kind of inside linebacker. Joe Schobert, who was with the Pittsburgh Steelers last year, but was with the Cleveland Browns for quite a long time of his career. He's only 28. He could be a name also. It's going to be interesting because when they go past Quan, who's very much the name that's being talked about, if he goes elsewhere, then it'd be interesting who's the next person who's on their chart, right? Or who's to fill? Because I think again, the indication that they want to fill, they realize that they need more quality there, as we think they do. They also think the same because their interest in quantity indicates that. So, is there any other names that I've highlighted that would be interesting to you at all? In terms of those guys,
Um, I was thinking of Anthony Barr.
and Anthony
Uh,
Barr's an interesting one, right? Yeah,
yeah, he's definitely got some history with Jets. This is one that I think a lot of fans would have a problem with, even though he is still very talented as a linebacker,
yeah,
and brings a lot to the table there. The history of him uh, signing with us verbally and then changing his mind and going back to the Vikings left a very sour taste in Jets fans' mouths. Uh, so if we had the chance to bring him back, I think a lot of Jets fans would probably not be on board with that, even if he does bring a lot to the table as a productive linebacker.
yeah.
That would be an interesting scenario.
It would be interesting. I mean, if he's the guy who they think is next up in terms of guy who can really play as a decently high level, you got to get this team to be better. Like we can't be say, oh, this and that. We can't accept this. No, you go get the guy that you want. It was a different. It was a McCagnon era squad. I mean, you made the right call. Like you don't want
Yeah,
to join because that was the year CJ joined. That was Gase's first year. So to be fair, he made the right call, right? Like,
yeah,
and he didn't go to another team. That's the biggest thing. He went back to where he'd been played. He left. He stayed at home. I don't know if he has family, but these things when you're locked in with your house with all these things and you're enjoying your team and the team, Minnesota have been a pretty good team. At least he didn't go to some other kind of terrible team and dumped us for them. He went back home. So I'm kind of pretty much as much as I was very annoyed at the time. If he would be the guy that they feel is earmarked to be a good player, go for him and get him. He's only 30 years old. He probably could still provide a little bit. He's got the experience, but still enough youth to hopefully be decent. So yeah, there's some interesting names. I think the linebacking. I think as you go through it, there's a lot of decent players who could do a job for us at the linebacking crew. So there's definitely other people past Quan Alexander who could be interesting at the linebacker. So I think definitely be aware of an addition from that list of free agents. If it's not Quan, it should be someone else for sure. So
hmm
yeah, no, but the linebacking crew again. This is just to wrap it up. Basically, it is just a very weak unit, and they're banking on the pressure from up front and the coverage from the back to kind of make this defense really sing, and CJ and Quincy do their thing in the middle, and I think that's probably what they're banking on. But you need to have the a bit more depth in each position so you can move things around. If you've got injuries, you can change things around formation wise. I think you need to give yourself a little bit more and give Olbrich a little bit more kind of pieces to kind of put together the puzzle for game day. But yeah, we are going through, like I said, those weaker groups on the team, and these being the weaker groups, there's still some really good players. I mean, we're talking about a weaker group with CJ Mosley part of it. It's
yeah.
it's it's it shows that the ability, the quality of the team generally, and the groups that we'll be talking through in the next couple of months, they're really high. It's going in the right direction. Let's just say that. And so I'm feeling really good about things again. Looking at this being one of the weakest group, and I'm not crazy. I'm not like devastated by it. I can kind of cognitively see, yeah, that's not great, but it's also could be a lot worse, and we've seen a lot worse, right, Matt?
No, we have for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is one of the first times I can be very confident in most of the starters on this team.
yeah,
I can look at the offense and be like, hey, we don't have a single starter spot open right now, right?
Yeah.
We finally have that shirt up a little. I mean, sure, we're not sure who's going to be playing left tackle or right tackle, but we know that we have our tackles.
Yeah, yeah.
So the offense settled. Defense, yep. Then you start looking up front. Who's our second interior defender, defensive lineman, and then after that, it's a lot of depth issues. And this is a 100% injury league that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
There will be injuries. We just need to pray that those injuries don't come at our weakest spots.
Yeah, exactly, and exactly. There's going to be injuries. You need that depth for people to come in and to hold the fort for a couple of weeks, hopefully, if not longer. So yeah, I think it's. But you look at these groups again. I'm not. It's just looking really good. The team's is getting put together really well. We need the young players to take another step, and I think we could be really pushing to being a pretty good outfit in the NFL and a pretty difficult matchup for anybody on a Sunday. So I think that'll wrap it up for this week. Matt, thank you so much for jumping on.
Thanks
Kind
for
of
having me.
pitching in during half term here in the UK, where so a lot of our guys are out with the family. I mean, I had to record this later because my commitments with my family too and my kids. So it's been really good to have you on anyway. And like I said, we need to do a full-on crossover with the Oklahoma Drill podcast as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm
Absolutely.
looking forward to it.
Is there before we head off? Is there anything you want to shout out in terms of the guys stuff that you maybe do on the podcast or anything else that you're doing?
Yeah, just tune in Oklahoma Drill. Me and Andrew are just gonna keep on churning out content over this off season. It's a little slow now, but we're gonna start picking things up soon.
Absolutely, it's a great listen, guys. Yeah, I highly recommend that for anybody wanting some extra Jets content. So yeah, guys. So we'll be back next week. We'll be covering probably as we talk through all this. It's probably going to be the defensive line or the interior, the defensive kind of tackle position, and that grouping of guys there next to Q. But yeah, we'll be back next week with a bunch of maybe low octane news and some other good conversation with the Jets. So have a great weekend. Have a great week, and we'll catch you next week.